Squid Game shows the horrors of capitalism in bright, happy colors. Debt makes ordinary people risk their lives in a deadly battle royale. They keep playing in hopes of winning the prize that will change their lives. Money in a golden, floating piggy bank. Money that drops from the sky to the sound of video game victory music that plays with every life erased from existence. Don't forget to smile. What Squid Game has to say about the world economy is about as subtle as a sledgehammer, and I respect that. But the show takes an unconventional approach to horror. It doesn't use the conventional visual language of the genre. Everything is brightly lit, beautifully colored, and decorated somewhere in between an office park and a kindergarten. This is not just the horror of capitalism, it's the uncanny horror of capitalism. The internet has already discussed this show a lot, but I have yet to see anybody bring up the theory of the uncanny. And because I was forced to read way too much Sigmund Freud in school, I am choosing to make that everyone else's problem. Psychoanalyzing Squid Game means I have to have spoilers in this video, so please consider yourself warned.
His influence towers above that of all other psychologists in the public eye. But was Sigmund Freud right about human nature?
The uncanny, according to Freud, is the experience of finding something terrifying in what's strangely familiar. We talk about it most often in terms of the uncanny valley, the unsettling, almost but not quite human look of robots or characters from video games that spent just the wrong amount of money on their animation budget.
Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
The terror of the uncanny is different from seeing something that we immediately recognize as dangerous or alien. And it's not quite the same as the pure fear of the complete unknown, like a dark room where anything could be hiding. The uncanny comes from seeing something that should be safe, should be ordinary, but then, horribly, isn't. The word Freud used for uncanny, and please forgive my pronunciation here and throughout the video, I'm trying, but I know it's not perfect, is unheimlich. Unheimlich means unhomely or unfamiliar. Homely things are things like warm fires or the songs we remember from childhood, things that feel safe to the oldest parts of our memory. The uncanny, or the unhomely, is almost the same as what we remember, and then horribly wrong. The uncanny begins in childhood memories, and so does Squid Game. The very first shot of the show is a memory, in black and white, of the playground game in the show's title. We see the main character, Ju-Hyun, as a kid and hear his adult self describe winning that game as a moment of happiness.
그 순간 나는 세상을 다 가진 것처럼.
We'll come back to the themes of childhood later, there is a lot to unpack there. But first, the flashback ends, and we find ourselves in a very familiar, everyday kind of misery. This is how Squid Game shows us the real world. Jobs that don't pay enough to survive, unpaid loans, begging for just enough money to get by. Gi-Hyun steals money from his mother to bet on a horse race. First a bad decision, and then a very statistically unwise one. But he genuinely seems to believe that this will be his big break. He'll pay his mom back. Everything will be better. He's trying to get enough money to afford both a birthday dinner and a birthday present for his daughter.
가영 약속.
I appreciate that this show warned me in the first 15 minutes that it was here to devastate me emotionally. I can't say I wasn't warned. Gi-Hyun misses his train home. A well-dressed businessman sits next to him. For the first time, we hear our main character spoken to with respect. Sir.
선생님,
The businessman asks, will you play a game with me?
저랑 게임 한번 하시겠습니까?
It's a simple game. A game Gi-Hyun remembers from childhood. 2 squares of paper, thrown to flip over the opponent's piece. If Gi-Hyun wins, he finds himself a little bit richer. If he loses, he can pay his debt by accepting a slap to the face. And here we establish the visual language of Squid Game. A polished, corporate aesthetic, painted over with bright colors and childhood games. What ties the two together, and what drags our main character into a nightmare, is desperation. Desperation is in the big storytelling twists. Gi-Hyun is divorced. His ex-wife is going to take his daughter to America unless he can prove that he has enough money to be a responsible caretaker. His desperation also shows itself in little details. The fit of his clothes, the expressions on his face, the promise to his daughter that her next birthday will be better.
내년 생일에는 진짜 좋은 선물을 사줄게.
Gi-Hyun works a job that's known to be precarious. He works as a driver, and he's not getting enough hours to survive on the money that he makes. But he's not the only character driven by desperation. Economic anxiety is an existential threat for his childhood friend Cho Sang-woo, a man who, at first, seems to have climbed into success.
야, 쌍문동의 자랑, 쌍문동의 낙후 기른 천재.
Sang-woo went to a good university, got a good job, his mother is proud of him, and yet, here he is, desperate.
아니, 너 증권회사 다닌다더니 주식을 한 거야?
주식은 그렇게 크지 않고.
A few bad bets were all it took to undo years of doing everything you're supposed to do to thrive under capitalism. And so, with no good options, they both decide to compete in a deadly game. A game where if you win, you're rich, and if you lose, you're dead. We have crossed from the ordinary into someplace frightening, both old and new, familiar and unfamiliar. A place where childhood memories can become warped into threats against our adult selves. The uncanny. Sigmund Freud was very concerned with the ways our minds are changed by what happens to us when we're kids. He believed that trauma, or unmet needs in childhood, can change the way that the brain works, freezing us in one stage of development or another. So childhood is a very important place in his theories. Every event in the game's battle royale is based on a playground game. First, red light, green light. We see a doll, a creepily large doll, with a head that's out of proportion to the rest of her body in front of a twisted, dead tree. Before the audience or the characters learn that there are sniper rifles hidden in this game, the movement of the doll's head looks and sounds the way a turret moves. The inside of the secret campus where the game is played is designed to bring up childhood memories and then distort them. There are stairs in happy, childish pastels, sort of a preschool type of color palette, but they form a maze shaped like an optical illusion, endless and incomprehensible. A voice that sounds like a kindergarten teacher cheerfully reminds the players exactly what they need to do, and her speech pattern does not change when people start dying.
다시 한번 말씀드립니다. 술래가 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다를 외치는 동안 전진할 수 있으며.
The way the game looks is so disturbing because of how it distorts familiar things. Another recent release on Netflix, The Platform, shows the horrors of inequality in a more straightforward horror aesthetic.
Los de arriba, los de abajo.
Prisoners live in a dark tower, living off of food that comes down on a platform from above. Every floor eats the leftovers of the floor above them.
Es asqueroso.
Y todo el mundo comiera solo lo que necesita. La comida llegaría al nivel más bajo.
It shows a lot more classically recognizable horror elements. Shadows, blood, grays and reds, pits and prisons, and there's some really scary bits that I won't show in this YouTube video because I think you get the general idea. The classical style of horror conjures up immediate fears, our fear of the unknown in dark, shadowy places.
Mysterious pools of blood dripping from the ceiling.
Our terror and disgust when we see blood and gore. The uncanny builds more slowly, creating an eerie feeling that turns into dread as the familiar is slowly revealed to be something monstrous. In Freud's theory, the uncanny is the horror of dark secrets revealed. Freud believed that if a thought or a memory is too painful for the mind to process, it'll be pushed down into the depths of the unconscious, kept in a place so secret that the person who remembers the memory or the thought might not even know that it's there.
He proposed that people are motivated by unconscious desires and repressed memories.
The creepy feeling of the uncanny comes from recognizing things we almost remember, seeing that it is wrong, and then being reminded that there are hidden truths in our minds. Everything is unheimlich, uncanny, that ought to have remained secret and hidden but has come to light. Now, there are many levels to repression because there are all kinds of secrets that the mind can keep from itself. I'll start with questions on an individual level, the kinds of questions that we see characters in Squid Game try to figure out, like, what do we really value, and how much is it worth? The characters I loved the most in this show's ensemble cast value the people they care about. Kang Se-byo, born in North Korea, has exhausted all of her other options trying to get enough money to reunite her family. Ali Abdul, trying to feed his young family, still values the lives of the other contestants in the game and treats them with much more respect than he's used to receiving.
감사합니다. 감사합니다, 사장님.
나 사장님 아니니까 사장님 소리 좀 그만하고.
Ju-Hyun makes very questionable decisions in the show, but he genuinely seems to care about the people in his life, and he values making up for the mistakes he's made. One of the things that made Ju-Hyun such a believable hero for me was watching him wrestle with his worst instincts and then grow as a person. To put it in Freudian language, there is a lot of repression going on here. When we first meet him, he's not being honest with himself or the people around him, fooling himself over and over again that the next gamble is going to work out and everything's going to be fine. He mentions quickly that he has seen something incredibly painful and traumatizing. He watched a coworker die in what we later learn is police brutality at a strike. A memory he returns to later on, but the first time we hear him talk about that violent memory of his old job is in an argument with his ex-wife about why he wasn't there for the birth of his daughter. Then, at another level of repression, there are secrets about our identity. Who are we, really? And does that change when we're desperate enough? In Squid Game, many characters cross moral lines to survive. I say many characters crossed the line, but not all characters, because Ali Abdul did nothing wrong and deserved better. The first moment I remember him on screen, he saved Ju-Hyun, and the last moment I saw him was when he, too good for the universe he exists in, was betrayed because he trusted Sang-woo. Sang-woo's character arc is a painful one. Even though his mother is proud of him, he is broke and helpless when we meet him. We see him as a competent player in the game. He's the one who suggests that players team up to help each other survive. But when a game of marbles forces Sang-woo to choose between winning and saving his own life, and losing and letting his partner live, he chooses to convince Ali that he's found a way for them both to live. He's lying. Sang-woo kills Se-byuk for better odds at winning. And yet, in the final game, when Gi-hyun and Sang-woo are the only players left and one has to die, Sang-woo values something higher than his own life. Gi-hyun would have let his old friend live, and they both would have left the game broke but alive, but Sang-woo stabs himself, and in his last moments, he asks his old friend to take care of his mother. Freud would have a lot to say about the mother part, probably, but I am choosing to focus on the handful of Freud's ideas that I find valuable and not digging too deeply on all of the other ones. So, sidestepping the garbage heap of bad ideas Freud had and circling back to repression, a desperate man usually doesn't have a lot of good choices on the table. Does he do the selfish thing, repressing ideas we know he has about what's good and evil? Or does he do the selfless thing? Choosing to be selfless may mean either repressing a realistic idea of the outcome, or it may mean moving past what's repressed and accepting that yes, there will be consequences. That acceptance is the last thing we ever see of Sang-woo. The question of whether or not his final act of sacrifice redeems him for the lives he ended isn't answered with a resounding yes or a no. I think the story condemns the system more strongly than any individual, which brings me to what I think is the most interesting layer of analyzing the horror of Squid Game. What Uncanny horror tells us about the real world.
너 밥은 잘 먹고 다니는 거야?
잘 챙겨 먹으니까 걱정하지 마.
Some of what Squid Game says is specific to South Korea and the country's history. Household debt has been rising for years, and it's now more than 100% of the country's gross domestic product. Researching this video, I read interviews with people in South Korea who felt paralyzed by the debt they had to take on in order to get by, living in an economy with high unemployment and wildly expensive rent prices. Gi-hyun's memories of a strike at a car factory that was met by police violence are based on an event that really happened.
Squid Game. What an odd name.
There's also a critique here of American imperialism. Most of the rich VIPs, who say that the South Korean battle royale is the best in the world, speak English with an American accent.
I just have to say that I'm a difficult man to please. I hope you won't disappoint me.
During the first game, the first time we see death on screen, we hear an American jazz song. Darling, kiss me. America and the West's involvement with Korea left wounds that appear in the story, the aftermath of the Korean War.
엄마 아버지 꼭 오실 거다. 누나가 꼭 그렇게 만들 거야.
In 1997, during the Asian financial crisis, the International Monetary Fund offered South Korea a bailout package that included some very strict terms that weakened the country's protections for labor, leading to mass layoffs and workers having far fewer rights and safety than they had before. The effects of the International Monetary Fund's terms are still being felt in the country today. About 40% of workers in South Korea are classified as irregular workers, meaning that their hours are less stable and they have fewer protections. Now, I am not the best qualified person to explain all of the effects of American imperialism on a country that I don't have much of a personal connection to, so the links to all of my sources will be in the description. Squid Game's critique of capitalism is specific to its setting in South Korea, but it also feels very universal, which I think is part of why this show is becoming such a runaway success. Its characters feel like someone we know, even if we don't speak their language or understand the full cultural background of their stories. And the show asks some very broadly applicable questions about the state of the world.
저기요. 근데 6개 게임 다 통과하면 얼마를 주시나요?
Questions like, what do we really value? And do we have the freedom to treat what we value as worthy when we have such a strict concept of our own worth? A worth numbered by our wealth or by our debt. A worth that determines what kind of life we're able to live. Can we say that we, as adults, have built a healthier system than the rules we remember from the playground? Do we have a healthy economy if so many people fall into an inescapable pit that they feel they have no hope but to gamble? Should we really blame the people who are struggling before we ask if the rules of the game we're playing are fair? In Squid Game, the game's guards remind the players that the rules of the game are fair and everyone has a chance to win. As long as you follow the rules, you will safely exit this place with the prize money.
게임의 규칙만 잘 지키면 약속된 상금과 함께 무사히 이곳을 나가실 수 있습니다.
Nothing bad will happen to you if you just do what we say.
Right? They're wrong. When they're like, you're just a kid, millennial, blah, blah, they're wrong. But you're also wrong if you, and not just millennials, anybody, if you expect anything.
We're told that in our economy, the rules are clear. Play by the rules. Be good at the game. You'll be safe.
The interview begins the minute you walk into the building. First, ace those introductions. Greet everyone in a way that is authentic to you, like, hey, nice to meet you.
Get good grades. Go to a good college. Get a good job. Learn to code. Nothing bad will happen to you if you do what we say. But is that really a choice when the alternative is so brutal? You starve, or you bankrupt your family, or you play and you succeed. And are we being told the truth when we hear that everyone has an equal chance to win, and that good things always happen to the people who follow the rules?
제발요, 돈 주세요. 6달도 더 지났잖아요.
It's easy to feel that the way things are now is the way they have to be. But our way of life, the system we're living under, isn't an inevitable fact of life, or, in the language of the horror movie, an ancient evil or a demon older than humanity itself. It's just what's familiar to us. Or, I should say, almost familiar in a way that we feel deep down is wrong. The ending of the show, I should say the ending of season 1 because something tells me we will get a sequel, doesn't show Ju-Hyun overthrowing the game and living happily ever after the way I imagine this would end if Squid Game were a Hollywood movie. He wins the game, helps other contestants' bereaved families, and then returns, we believe, with the intent of destroying the game. But other, well-intentioned characters have failed to overthrow the game before, so it's really anyone's guess how the story is going to end.
그래서 난 용서가 안 돼. 너희들이 하는 짓.
But at least as far as analyzing the uncanny, it doesn't matter if the hero wins in the end, if he dies, if he becomes a villain. The critique is always there in the way that Squid Game sets up its horror.
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars.
In Freud's theory, the dread of the uncanny comes from recognizing something that is familiar and seeing it distorted. It suggests that perhaps there were secrets buried all along, and that all of the psychological work that we've done, transforming from children into adults, was perhaps built on top of ideas that were wrong all along.
첫 게임에서 탈락한 참가자의 숫자 255명, 참가자 1명당 걸려있는 상금 액수 1억.
Capitalism, according to Squid Game, corrupts human life the way that the Battle Royale warps children's games. I think that this show is becoming such a record-breaking success because it touches a feeling many people have been wrestling with for a long time. A feeling that maybe some of us have repressed, that the way we're living has a layer of brutality beneath the cheerful facade.
Get this, the richest 1% controls more wealth now than at any time in more than a half-century.
South Korea's household debt rose to an all-time high at the end of last year.
The remaining games will be held as scheduled. I'm sure you won't be disappointed.
That's one of the best things about horror as a genre, to me, how fiction can ask questions about the frightening parts of reality we try not to think about. Something frightening has always been there. The power of horror is that it says, made you look.